Harvie was born into the world upside down, back to front, and was christened Harvie Krumpet. His father's name was Maciek, a lumberjack with hands as big as shovels and hair that smelt of pine needles. His mother's name was Liliana, a weary woman with lead in her veins from working in a mine. She was obsessed with counting her fingers and had conversations with people that just weren't there. The other villagers stayed well clear. But she didn't need friends, now that she had her miracle. Harvie grew strong and healthy. He had his father's ears and his mother's open heart. But soon, his parents began to notice peculiarities. He began to have odd twitches and liked to touch things with his index finger, for no reason at all. When he met someone, he had to touch them on the nose. The doctor said he had Tourette syndrome, a brain disorder that meant he couldn't control his impulses. It was like trying to control a sneeze. There was no cure or explanation. At school, Harvie was called a thick. His friend was Bogusz. Bogusz stuttered and had problems with his mucus. The other kids threw stones, and together they were tricked, teased, and tortured. Until Liliana pulled Harvie from school and decided to educate him herself. Although she was illiterate, she knew about facts and filled his brain with all sorts of stuff. An ostrich's eye is bigger than its brain. Butterflies smell with their feet. And elephants can't jump, no matter how hard they try. Every day he wrote more and more facts in a notebook he carried everywhere. As Harvie grew taller and stronger, his mother grew shorter and madder, slowly fizzling into insanity. Often she'd mistake him for an intruder. Harvie followed in his father's footsteps. He liked working with him, but at times felt he needed to be alone with his problems. He'd ponder the world beyond, wishing for things to change. And suddenly they did. He returned to find his home burnt to the ground. His mother had left the stove burning in the night, and Harvie found his parents nearby, frozen and nude. But there was more to come. The Germans invaded. Harvie escaped and found himself on a ship bound for a place called Australia. His world was turned upside down and back to front. Again. Harvie ended up in a small suburb called Spotswood. He rented a small house with 11 other migrants and tried to assimilate as best he could, changing his name from Harvie Krumpet to Harvie Krumpet. He got a job, and many years went by as he saved his money and tried not to indulge. Life didn't change much, but his body did. His hair fell out and regrew on his shoulders. In the evenings, he'd learn English off an old television he'd found amongst the rubbish. He put little curtains on it and found it a mesmerizing source of facts. The first thing he ever watched was a Busby Berkeley film. He fell in love with all the bosoms and smiles. It was so different to the Spotswood dump. At work, he tried to make friends, But for Harvie, it wasn't easy. Harvie's skull had split in half. The doctors inserted a steel plate between his scalp and skull and laced it up with 19 stitches. He was left with a scar that looked like he'd had a lobotomy. Harvie wished he had more hair. He left the dump and tried new jobs. He seemed to get sacked a lot. He didn't know why. But he was always discovering more facts. Rubber bands last longer if refrigerated. The Bible was written by the same people who thought the earth was flat. And time does not heal all wounds. One time, Harvie got a job collecting golf balls. This is where he got struck by lightning. But he survived, and even made it into the local newspaper. Harvie began to wonder how he'd survived so much bad luck. Maybe he was like a cat and had 9 lives. He thought he had about 4 left. Actually, the biggest threat to his daily life was the 28 cigarettes he smoked. He developed asthma, so went and saw his doctor. In those days, the dangers of smoking were not known. Dr. Greystanes recommended Harvie smoke even more. Smoke is soothing for the lungs, she'd say, just like steam in a sauna. His asthma